the truth is the number one stopper. They say you think, but you never want to speak up. They say you're hiding there, you're busy, but what's on your mind, kid? What's on your mind, kid? They say out loud, there will never be me. But they're the
Hello, and welcome to Board Game Barrage, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am Mike DiLisio, joined today by my not friends, Kellen, Nealon, and Mark.
That's mean.
Gentlemen, lovely to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you. It's
Thanks
a pleasure to be here. Mike, as a first-time guest on the Board Game Barrage podcast,
Yes.
It is our duty to give you a tank color.
Oh, okay.
Have you perused the colors?
What do you mean has he perused it? He's been looking at it for the last 2 hours, thinking about this, dreaming about this. And when I say hours, I mean months.
The one thing you've aspired to.
Yes, I have indeed perused. I was under the impression that I would have literal months to peruse this instead of the moments that I've had, but that's okay because it forced me to go with my gut. I also am a bit surprised that I had a menu to choose from. I thought that I had the entire spectrum of the universe in front of me.
Well, most of those have been taken.
Well, I had a particular color I was going to go for that was not on the menu, but that's okay. I was going to go with cyan.
That's fine.
No, it's not on the menu. I'm going to pick something on the menu.
Well,
for you.
Quinn's did go off menu, but you might not be as important.
I think we could get cyan working.
I am almost certain we can make that happen.
Yeah.
Does that color exist in the...
Okay, so I actually found out recently that I'm colorblind.
Oh.
And it's the blue-yellow colorblind that's the rarest colorblind, so I'm kind of happy that, if anything, I'm rare and elite.
Yeah.
So I'm unsure if I can see cyan, so that would be the only thing that I'm questioning.
Then we're not going to go with that. The only reason I wanted to go with cyan is because I had a connection back to the Commodore 64, which was my...
Yeah, that's...
Yeah. So I'm going to go with the purple range, and I'm going to go with... I'm the Fandango take. The Fandango tank.
That works.
It just has a lovely lilt to it, doesn't it?
I've got it here. I just don't know what Fandango... What is a Fandango? Are you proud of that?
Is it your bond with Dan Hughes, your co-host on Spobo, that has drawn you to Fandango?
No. Well, first of all, I do like purple. So I want something in that hue was nice, but I just like the name Fandango. I mean, it just sounds like, I don't know.
Tough to argue that.
It sounds jaunty. Yeah. It sounds playful. Two things I'd like to...
that you're known for.
Well, I'm well known for my jauntiness.
Well, I mean, I think that cements you as the Fandango tank then.
Well,
Yes.
Welcome
I'm
to the
proud.
podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm feeling the Fandango running through me as we speak.
Get that checked.
Mike, thank you so much for being here. I have one question for you. Who are you and how did you get into our podcast studio?
Who am I? Well, let me go all the way back. No, I'm Mike DiLisio. I guess now, how did I come to the Board Game Barrage podcast? I was turned on to your podcast by the co-host of my current podcast, Sporadically Bored, Dan Hughes. And he is a massive fan of the Board Game Barrage podcast. And he started to talk about the joys and the splendor of listening to you. And so, of course, I had to listen to it. And now I am myself a massive fan of the Board Game Barrage podcast. And so Dan and I have had all three of you on two separate shows. And so to me, this feels kind of like do you remember back, you probably don't because you're not as old as I am, but back in the olden days on network television, they used to have the Battle of the Network Stars. And it was like where they got the biggest stars from all the network television shows.
Mark just perked up, so I think he does.
I do remember that. And also, let me just point this out. Last week, I made a reference to Hugh Downs.
Oh, from 2020.
And these guys had never heard of Hugh Downs.
The show
I put a picture of Hugh Downs on our Discord server. Nothing.
I'm Hugh Downs, and this is 2020. Yeah, I definitely. So I feel like this is a battle of the podcast stars, and I have not answered your question well. I do a podcast that's part of the Dice Tower Network, and now I am myself part of the Dice Tower Network. I was a teacher for many years, and somehow through some confluence of events, I am now working in South Florida for the Dice Tower. And so I do board game media now as my job, I suppose, which is still odd for me to say. And now, obviously, that has paid off because I'm now finally invited on to the Board Game Barrage podcast. All it took was a job with the Dice Tower.
And you no longer have to play games alone, which is what I believe you've been doing up until now.
This is a false narrative, Nealon, but I'll feed into it. No, yeah.
I get this all the time from them.
Yeah,
So.
we all have false narratives we have to buy into. But yeah, no, I'm proud to wave the solo flag by myself.
Preach,
I still
brother.
do solo game, but yeah, no, obviously I have to be more quasi-social and interact with other people and play games so that I can have things to talk about.
But let me just ask you this. What is it like to sleep in Tom Vassel's attic?
In his attic? Let's just do word association. Cozy, terrifying, warm.
What's the funniest, weirdest thing you found up there?
In the attic?
In his attic, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I was going to try to come up with some cosmic encounter joke, but I can't.
It's perfect.
I don't have the mental capacity right now.
I imagine that there are things in that attic that could take you from being a member of the Dice Tower to running the Dice Tower. Do you see what I'm saying?
Are you intimating some blackmail material? Is that what you're getting at here? Is that there's something that would allow me to...
I don't know what intimating is, but we're way past that.
All Kellen is saying is that Reiner Knizia has not been seen in 3 years.
Exactly.
I don't know. I saw him in a llama outfit not too long ago, and that made my month. Look, I don't think that there's any skeletons in that closet. I think he's a lovely, lovely man who is responsible for my livelihood.
So this week on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to be talking about popcorn games. That is our topic for the second half. These are games that are perhaps a little bit lighter. They're not necessarily going to tax your brain in the way that sort of heavier games will, but they're games that are going to be fun and provide a light, entertaining experience for all involved. Does that seem about right?
We'll see.
I was going to say they were salty, but then I thought...
I was going to say buttery.
Yeah, I knew it was a Mark joke. I almost said this is a Mark joke because it's like vaguely reminiscent of like a dad joke, but older.
What? My jokes are
Older than dad jokes?
I don't know. Who's this Hugh whatever 2020?
Don't worry about it.
Before we get there, we're going to talk about the games that we've been playing. Mark, what have you been playing?
Yes. Well, I've been playing what you've been playing. Both of us played.
Fresh
Fish by Friedman Friese. This was a game that what are you looking at me like you're all confused?
But you didn't... Was I invited to that?
You were invited.
Excuse me?
You were at a wedding.
Oh...
You can step away from a wedding for people you didn't even know.
I had no
to
choice.
Come play with your friends.
The Blue Tank said I had to stay there, and I had to like it.
Don't buy it. I don't buy it. We pled for you to come play with us. But anyway, so this was a game that I got thrown in on a multi-game trade that I was working on. I wasn't really seeking it. It was just like hey, take this game along with the other ones as long as we're doing this big trade. So I didn't really have very high expectation of it. Mike, have you played Fresh Fish?
I have not. While you've been talking about this, it just kind of struck into my head that Freeman Free seems to be on the small card game kick here lately, doesn't he? You had the Fabled Fruit. You've got all of these little...
Right. Fortress.
Yeah. I'm wondering if this is just a little phase he's going through.
Right. So, Fresh Fish is from 2013. It's an older design.
Okay.
And I'm actually pretty lukewarm on free games in general. I'm not a big fan of Power Grid. Fabled Fruit was okay, but none of his games really have been big hits for me. But I'm happy to report that Fresh Fish I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
Fresh Fish is, I guess it's an auction, area control,
route building
sort of game. What it is you are all participants in a fair, and there are the 4 products that you find in all fairs.
Yeah,
there are
definitely.
fish, soda, ice cream, and cheese. So the standard for fair
ground. Regular old fair.
Yeah, regular fair stuff.
Is this American fair or is it international?
Every American fair I've been to.
That's right.
You've never been to an American fair.
As American as Fresh Fish. So anyway, what your goal is to have your stall as close to the sources of these 4 different goods as possible at the end of the game. And so basically, if you are 2 steps away from your fish cart being from the source of the fish, that counts as 2 points. And you're trying to amass the lowest score. You're trying to be the closest overall. But you're being blocked by other players, being blocked by these little stalls that are being put up. It's a very, very cutthroat game. On your turn, you're doing basically one of 2 actions. You're placing reservation markers in these spots along the board. And that's one action you can do. The other action you can do is drawing a tile. So these tiles are where you can potentially get your fish cart or your cheese cart or your soda cart. If a cheese cart is drawn, for example, all the players will do a blind bid, and the player who bids the highest gets to place his cheese cart on one of the reservation tokens. The thing is that the board is cut into many little parcels of 3 or 4 spaces, and the parcels are either assigned a value of 1 or 2. Multiple players can assign reservation markers to a parcel. So, for example, Mike and Neelan and I can all have one of our reservation tokens on a 3-unit parcel. But if the parcel's number is 1, as soon as anybody places something in that parcel, the other 2 reservation tokens are knocked out and roads are built on top of it. So the game becomes incredibly cutthroat because there's the combination of this knocking other players off the board along with this random tile draw, because half of the tiles are these carts that you're putting out, but the other half of these tiles are these stalls which act as blockades around the board. And whenever you draw one of these stall tiles, again randomly drawn, you replace one of your own reservation markers with a stall tile. So you're knocking yourself out, but sometimes you want to knock yourself out because you knock your opponents out, or sometimes you want to build roads. Anyway.
Or sometimes just to create a blockade.
Right. Or yes, exactly. Or just as simply as creating a blockade. The game is just incredibly tight, incredibly cutthroat, and just a very tight experience in 45 minutes. I was just surprised by Fresh Fish. I think it's a game that you like.
I think Kellen would like this. Yeah. The things I liked about it is that it sort of divides your attention between sort of diversifying where you're going to have route options. Because if you place a marker down, you're sort of saying, I potentially want to store here, but there's not a guarantee by any stretch of imagination.
Right.
So you might want to place another marker somewhere else close by. And then when the appropriate tile gets drawn by you, it's another decision of, how much does someone want this? Do I have to bid high to get it? Because the other thing is that your money is fixed at the start of the game and doesn't re-enter the system. So you have 15 coins for all 4 bids, and that's it. And even better than that, that money sort of starts to reduce your score at the end of the game.
Which is huge, yeah.
Yeah, which is massive. That's how the winning player won, by effectively just not spending their money as much as we were, and also doing well on the route building.
Right. So your final score at the end of the game is how many spots it takes you to get to these sources minus the amount of money you still have. So there's a push and pull between making sure you get small routes and or hoarding cash.
Let me ask you this.
All right.
My ears perked up at the beginning. Have you ever played classic PC CD-ROM game Roller Coaster Tycoon?
I have not.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about my master strategy as a 12-year-old, which was to build a circle area where people can walk, visitors to my park, give them free food at every corner of this route.
Right. Sounds great.
And then put one bathroom and charge $250 to use the bathroom.
Right.
And then cut off the route so they can't get out of that area.
Right.
So
basically you know how to play Fresh Fish.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah,
I've
you
already
can just dive in. Yeah. No teach necessary.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds fun.
Yeah, it is very fun. It's very fun and very fast. Very simple rule set. With Teach, I think it was like 50 minutes.
Is there any, I know you don't look to Freedom and Freeze typically for thematic connections, but to me, this sounds pretty mechanical. You got a closed economy auction route building game in 45 minutes. How does that come together? I mean, is there any thematic connection at all?
Why are you buzzkilling already?
Oh,
we
I'm
invited you on
Make
here.
no mistake. First of all, I think that the whole Fresh Fish thing was shoehorned in. Are fish more important of a resource than any of the other resources in this game?
I thought that was strange too. Yeah, the game is called Fresh Fish, but they're just one of the 4 stores.
Right. Why not reservation carts? Why not cheese plantations? I don't know.
I can answer this question with 100% certainty, actually. Because
and the answer is, I thought we invited a gentleman to our podcast recording.
That was your first mistake.
The answer is, it's a Friedman Friese game, and all his games start with FF or a single F.
Oh,
that's it.
No, I'm aware of that. That's what I'm saying. I think this feels more shoehorny than his other games.
Look, it's not a thematic romp by any stretch, but the freshness is something because you are trying to build routes that are close as possible to the stall. Look, I think wherever the theme is in its goofiness, is the fact that you're getting soda and ice cream and cheese. Like, it's the silliness of it. Don't go into this like if you want to immerse yourself in a fairground experience whatsoever. But if you want a cut your opponents off sort of type game, this is what you're looking for.
That question was a massive red herring. I really had no interest other than I wanted to see if you could defend the Fresh Fish title. That's all that was about.
Of course. So that is Fresh Fish by Friedman Friese.
So I have been playing a game that I was pretty excited to try. I've now played it a couple of times as Sanctum. This was kindly provided to us by CGE as a review copy. Sanctum is a game that is trying to recreate Diablo, the classic video game, and that style of video game. So a
Diablo.
It is a hack and slash loot game. You're killing a lot of monsters. You're getting a lot of loot. You're finding better loot than what you have, which allows you to get better at killing monsters. Eventually you get towards a end boss, and basically the way that the competitive side of this game boils down is whoever is better at fighting the end boss wins the game. This is by Philippe Naduc, who had previously done Adrenaline. This is a game that also is trying to create a first-person shooter video game, but using Euro mechanics, and that's kind of the same vibe with Sanctum. It's actually surprisingly Euro for what could have been, and by all accounts, looking at the theme, maybe should have been an Ameritrashy type of game. But what he does, he creates these interesting Euro systems, and I think Sanctum primarily revolves around this system of leveling up. So as you're killing monsters, you have this skill tree, and you're moving gems up the tree in order to unlock skills. Whenever you sort of fully uncover a skill, you unlock it. But what's interesting about the system is it doesn't lock you into a single order of events. So you could do your level 3 skill before your level 1 skill, but that changes the difficulty of unlocking other skills. So there's a fun little puzzle there. Each character is unique and has a bunch of different abilities. And all of the abilities and the items all revolve around the way the fighting works, which is basically a game of dice rolling mitigation. So you have a fixed number of dice, you roll them, you have to hit certain numbers for certain monsters, and your abilities adjust the values of the dice. And that's kind of the flow of the game. You pick up more monsters, you roll some dice, use your abilities to kill them, get more experience, get more items, rest, refresh, repeat.
And the way that you get items in the game is you choose which mob you want to fight, and it's either a red, a green, or a blue mob, and they're in sets of 2. So if you think, oh, I need some more red items, and they also have indicators which part of your armor that it goes into, whether it's a sword or a helmet or footwear. And so you're choosing which mobs to fight, hoping to get upgrades that are going to coalesce with your specific character.
Right, exactly. So if you're later in the game and you still have a level 1 helmet, you want to pick up a level 3 monster that was carrying a helmet so that you could get that upgraded.
And there's some choice where you might be better at blue. So everything is either red or blue in the sense that it uses physicality or uses blue
mana, focus.
Blue. And so you might see a level 3 item that's blue, but you're primarily a red physical focus character. And so you have to decide whether that's worth it or not, and some of that trade-off there.
So this is about as much as I had played the game when I played it at Gen Con with our friend Dan last year. And we both came away from that play session super excited, which has kind of fueled my anticipation for this. I'm very sad to say that the last third of the game, which is the boss encounter, feels pretty undercooked. The way that works is the fighting system is largely the same to the monsters you've been fighting, but the cards they are dealt out have all these negative effects that may or may not hurt you more depending on the build you've created. It's sort of just this unknowable thing until you get to that fight. And it felt a little bit too arbitrary, I would say, as a footnote to like everything you've been doing up to that point.
Yeah, I think, and we'll get to the feature topic when we get to the feature topic, Mr. DiLisio, because I'm not 100% sure I agree that there is, in fact, such a thing as a popcorn game, and I'm excited to yell at you about it.
I'm looking forward to it.
But Sanctum is this pleasant romp through nothing. Like, every part of it is pleasant, but then the end boss has nothing to do with what you've done before, and is so LOL random. And there's no interaction. There's literally, like, you couldn't put less interaction in the game than is in the game. And so it's this weird thing where there are these systems that you're interested in. I'm interested in how I upgrade my character. I'm interested in what armor I get. And then we got to the final boss, and it was just like, I guess I won. But also, you couldn't interact. You couldn't touch each other. And it wasn't entirely clear, you know, that you couldn't just hand out all the armor cards and then go to the boss battle, and that it would have been very different than what had happened. And so for however long of a game it was bizarre. Like, it's really hard to even articulate.
I mostly agree with you. I think the thing that was very telling, once I read the rules for the game, so Kellen and I had agreed to play this, and I read the rules, I was like, oh, I don't think Kellen's going to like this much at all. But I sort of made that pretty clear up front, and we came away from it thinking, well, at least I did, thinking, well, that was a pleasant shared experience, but was it a competitive game? Not really. And should it have been a competitive game, actually? I mean, I think, frankly, it would have worked a lot better if it had been a cooperative game.
Well, it's interesting because I haven't played this game, but just based off of your discussion about it, it seems to me that perhaps the biggest issue is that this is a game that sounds like it's all incremental. You're building towards something. You know from the beginning of the game that your ultimate goal is to defeat this big boss. And anybody who's played a game like Diablo where it's a loot grab, you're trying to get more and more stuff, get the best stuff so that you can eventually take on something that you never would have been able to at the beginning of the game. And if you're building up to this big anticipatory moment and it's flaccid, then that to me is the problem. It might just be that they're setting you up for something that doesn't pay off.
Totally.
And is your complaint that the setup is fine, but you're setting up to something that
you're setting up to something that you don't know.
Right.
A, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then B, different parts of the final encounter boss battle are different for each player.
Oh, really?
And so you could turn over a card that is way worse for you than it would be for Neelan.
Okay.
And so it was pleasant. There was pleasant time had, and Christina Blue Tank actually liked it quite a bit more than me, but at the end of it, I wasn't sure that I'd played a board game, to be honest. To be completely, there were systems, and they were interesting systems, but I'm not convinced it couldn't have been like a movie, almost.
As in totally passive.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Let me ask a provocative question, if you don't mind here. Since this is the designer, and I love prefacing questions by saying they're going to be provocative because that way people are expecting them to be, whether they are or not.
And this is about 5 minutes after you've used the word flaccid. Right?
Well, I had to leave a pause there. Since this was the designer of Adrenaline, as you mentioned, which is when that came out, it was first-person shooter in a box, right? And it turned out to be a Euro game that kind of did a good job from all reports. Could it be that this game was not originally designed as a Diablo experience, but it was designed as a series of Euro mechanisms that now that he's kind of become known for converting video game experiences into board games, let's try to make this a Diablo experience, and it just doesn't quite work?
I don't think so, quite specifically because I think everything about the design of the game sort of screams Diablo, almost in a way that's Blizzard needs to get on the phone to someone at CGE. But also, I think the key mechanism, it seems so specific to this idea of a skill tree that at the very least, he must have had that in the back of his mind when he was designing it. That's my take, at least.
Yeah, I think that it's so strict to being like Diablo that it loses sight of the goal of a functional board game, to be honest, because the upfront phase of gathering loot is Tokaido-esque in how you get to the end, and then it starts punishing people who haven't made it to the end. But it's unclear as to whether it makes more sense to rest more often and get better items. The entire up front of the game feels fun for 45 minutes until you go, wait a minute, all we're doing is passing out 2 cards to each person. The game is sort of you're barely going to get hurt until the boss battle. Right. You may not even get hurt. And none of us were even close, I think, until after an hour and 20 minutes, I think one of us had almost been hurt once. Right. So all of the dice mitigation that we had been doing for an hour and a half was
not really important.
Almost irrelevant.
The rulebook even specifically says it's extremely unlikely you will take a wound before the boss battle. And it just feels like, okay, then what are we doing except accumulating loot? Which, is certainly in the spirit of that style of game because you're just fighting trash until you get to something hard. But it just, as an actual board game experience, as something that you're supposed to be invested in what you're doing, I found that hard to justify.
And with a board, with a box cover like that, you better be getting wrecked just repeatedly throughout the game. That's setting you up for some big, nasty violence, and you're flipping cards. Yeah, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I guess, Neelan, the question I would ask, right? You've now played it multiple times to my one. Are you going to play it again?
I think I could see myself playing it one more time.
And
so I would say my less board game experience friends, certainly. And I would try it once or twice with them. If they take to it, so be it. But otherwise, I think I don't see myself playing a lot of it.
Mensa friends at the top.
Oh, jeez.
Then Cal and Alan.
We're not doing this. We're not ranking my friends.
How far down?
Well, I agree with the ranking so far.
Oh, man. That is going to do it for Sanctum by CGE. Mike, what have you got for us? What have you been playing?
Recently, I've been playing a game that I just got from Kickstarter, Burnt Island Games, in the Hall of the Mountain King. This is a game, thematically, you are trolls. So not a terribly original theme, to be fair, but it works for the game because the idea behind it is that you've got a central board, which is the interior of a mountain, and you are digging through the interior of this mountain using, wait for it, polyomino pieces. And by doing this, by digging these tunnels, you're not only gaining points, but you are unearthing resources. And you can see those resources printed on the board. When you're laying the polyominoes on top of it, those are the resources that you are unearthing. But what's interesting about it, there's a couple of things about it that are interesting. You start with a kind of they call it a trolls moot, which I don't know if this is an actual word or if this is something that they've created. But it's basically your collection of trolls, and everyone has their own individual player board, and you draft starting 4 trolls. And these trolls are going to give you starting resources, and they're also going to give you resources that trigger throughout the game. Because one of the things that I do like about the game quite a bit, and I actually do like the game, but one of my favorite parts is the way you gain resources, which is that when you add a new troll to your trolls moot, it goes above 2 trolls beneath it. Okay, so you start with 4 on your bottom row, and it turns into being a pyramid.
Right.
Pyramid of Trolls, which really should have been the name of the game, but it wasn't. So you place a troll over to the trolls beneath it, and every troll has what resources they produce. And so what you need to make sure you're doing is before you're placing a troll above the other 2 trolls beneath it, that you've spent those resources that they've had on there sitting on their cards. Because if not, they're not going to produce the resources. If there's already a resource there, it doesn't produce another one. It'll only produce what has not been produced by that troll, if that makes any sense. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to spend resources first from your trolls, then from your kind of supply to gain more tunnel pieces that you can go, and you're trying to move these unearthed, I don't know what they call them, totems. They're basically statues, and you have little pedestals that you can place these statues on, and the closer to the center of the mountain you are, the more points they're worth. And so my favorite part, again, is this whole resource management and this cascading of resources, which is a really, really satisfying mechanism when you can pull it off well.
Okay.
The actions are very simple. It's not very difficult to teach, but there is a surprising level of thought that's gone into it. I've only played it a few times. I've played it at 4. I've played it, I want to say, at 3, and then I played it solo once, which I wouldn't even describe because it's a cooperative version of the game. The main game is a competitive game, although it's not the most interactive game you'll find. But it looks lovely. It's got, Kickstarter tends to come correct with the components. I think even the retail is going to be fine. It's got art by Quanche Moria, or if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So a game that I'm afraid is going to get lost in the morass of all of the games out there, but it's definitely worth a try if you get a chance to play it. It does not play like anything else that I've played exactly. There's enough uniqueness going on that it stood apart.
So this is actually one I was excited to play last year. So it was one of my top picks to at least check out at Gen Con. We got a very brief overview by the designer, but we didn't get a chance to play it. I'm definitely a little bit disappointed to hear that there's not that much substantive interaction, because one of the things that excited me was this idea that you're tunneling into a shared board.
Yes.
So does that end up just being pretty isolated per player?
Everyone starts with a mine entrance, basically. And just by design, you have designated spots where you can start. And they're going to put you on opposite ends of the board. Now, you absolutely can screw over the other players. You can never actually touch them orthogonally. You can get up to them diagonally, and you can basically make it so it makes it much more challenging for them to get to those center areas that are worth more points. So perhaps it's group dependent. If you want to play this mean, you probably could. You could kind of see what the other people are going for, and you could there are these shared workshops, they're called, that give you special kind of powers. And if you can see a workshop that somebody's going to want based on the strategy they're going, and you can kind of rush yourself to grab one of those first and put it by you, that's definitely a way. Also, there are spells that come out, and some of those spells can be a little bit interactive, and so that might be a way that you want. By its design, it doesn't necessarily compel you to be cutthroat or in your face. You could certainly play it that way if you so desired.
But Mike, you can win Scythe using combat. It's built into the game.
That feels like a non sequitur. I don't know exactly. Just intuitively, that feels like it has nothing to do with it, but I appreciate you going for it. Are you trying to imply that Scythe is not interactive?
Gotcha. No, I think, sorry, to be frank, the hope would be, and the board for this is like really striking when
It
you
is.
see it all out there and people like digging in, and the theme feels fun. And so when Nealon was talking about it, I was excited about it. But if the game doesn't in any way reward you for getting all up in someone else's face, then your best bet is to try to not do that. And so, you know, whether or not the game like allows you, quote unquote, to do it, if the game doesn't reward you with winning, then it's certainly not interactive enough for someone
Right,
like me.
yeah.
But
Yeah, that's actually-
it'd be interesting to see how it bears out, right? I'm not claiming this game does or does not have that, though I would like to make claims that I know nothing.
Yeah, no, I
You
would
do.
not put this high on an interactive scale. If you were going to go on a 1 to 10 scale, I would probably put it at a 4.
And do you find like the polyomino puzzle of laying out the tunnels, did you find that satisfying in Mountain King?
It's interesting. They're polyominoes, but it's really not a puzzle. It's more
Okay.
it's more route building than a puzzle. You're incentivized to some extent to build larger tunnels just because larger tunnels are worth more points. Now, the aggregate is such that there's not going to be a huge difference if you're building 3 5-length tunnels versus however many 2 to 3 length tunnels. A lot of times that's going to be dependent upon the resources that you have, because it takes, if you're going to build a length 5 tunnel, you have to use 5 of the same resource, whatever that resource may be. The resources that are more scarce, you get more points if you use 5 of those. I can't even remember what they're called. The red ones. Those are worth more because they're more scarce, as opposed to iron. You can spend 5 iron, you just will get fewer points than if you spent 5 of the red resource, whatever that might be. So it's really not a puzzle in that way. The biggest puzzle aspect of the game, I would say, is there's 2. One is the management of your resources and trying to make sure that when you do trigger one of those cascading resource things, that you get most, if not all, of the possible resources available. And then there is an element of moving. You have to spend carts, which is a resource, to move these statues closer to the center, because that's where you get your points.
Okay.
So that was In the Hall of the Mountain King from Burnt Island Games.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to our feature topic. We're going to be talking about popcorn games.
So, Mike, I listen to you all the time. You know, everywhere you go, I follow you.
Sure.
From the streets of Indiana to the avenues of Homestead, Florida.
You talk about popcorn games, and I'm not sure I've heard too many other people use this phraseology of popcorn games, and you defend them in a way that I wanted to get on the podcast and talk about. So why don't you tell us what a popcorn game is, and then tell us why you're wrong about it.
Fair. You know, I'm hopeful that no one has said this phrase before, because I would like to monetize it if I can. I'm sure I must have heard it somewhere, but really all it is, it's a riff on the idea of a popcorn movie, which, you know, I'm sure that we've all heard before. It's an idea that, like a popcorn movie, right? It's something that may not be a great product on an objective level, but it's still entertaining. All right. You have to leave some of your critical brain at the door when you enter the theater in these movies. But I want to make it really clear that it's not the same thing as a movie that's so bad it's good, right? To me, that's a different thing. A popcorn movie is something like, I think probably the one that comes to mind the most is Tremors, right?
Right.
It's pretty self-aware, I think, that movie. I think it knows that it was going to be a B movie. It was not necessarily looking to be Cecil B. DeMille.
I get that reference.
You like that? Yeah. I think Hugh Downs has been in a lot of these movies. But so popcorn games similarly are games that might not be the best design games. They might be clunky or cluttered. They may not even look great, but they're just fun. There might be slight or maybe even non-existent strategy, but it just creates a fun experience. And so when I came up with this term, first of all, I don't even remember the first time I said it, or when I heard somebody say it and I took it for my own. I just sometimes, I think, react against people that come at a game because they feel, well, this isn't balanced. Okay, well, is it trying to be? Is that really what they're trying to do? Is this a game that is trying to create a balanced experience, or is it trying to create an experience that creates fun interactions for the people around the table? I think, of course, if you're playing a game that is designed in such a way, or should be designed in such a way, that there is this tight, balanced experience, and then you don't get that, well, sure, that's frustrating. That, is an objectively bad design. I don't necessarily think that games have to be designed that way.
So I guess the interesting part of this is I interpret the word popcorn in almost a pejorative way, because if I can have an action film that is a straight popcorn movie, or I can have an action film or a fun film that is both popcorn fun and has some depth to it, I definitely am 10 out of 10 times going to see that movie. I'm thinking of movies like Edge of Tomorrow or Snowpiercer, things that are really trashy, action, fun, silly, stupid movies, but have kind of a subtext or something interesting running underneath them.
That's a 10 out of 10 thing. You would never want to have just a brainless Transformers blow everything up sort of deal.
It's possible in a movie theater I would, but then when you transition to board games, it's even less possible.
Look, I'm with you there. I'm just saying that for the blockbuster movie example, I think there's something different there.
There's some value in that for you. No?
I don't think so. But so, Mike, what is a quintessential popcorn game? And to help round out the definition, and I think we can all react to your wrongness.
Well, I'm going to try to pick a game. A lot of the games that I thought of are games that are not terribly mainstream. And so I want to avoid those because I'm trying to think of ones that perhaps we've all played. I'm just going to come right with the hate right off the bat. I'll let you just festoon it upon me. Just bring it. I think Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea is a good example of a popcorn game. It's a game that I think it's very, it's what?
That is not good.
Oh, no, it's quite good. Self-aware. I think that game is very self-aware. It does not take itself terribly seriously. It's trying to create this 4X experience in a more accessible, streamlined is definitely not the right word because the game is not necessarily streamlined, but it's just goofy. I guess sometimes I want to play a game that is not taking itself too seriously, but is also not trash. And while you may disagree with me, based on your discussions of it, you may well think it's trash. I would heartily disagree with you. But I think it's quite self-aware of what it's trying to do. And I think it does what it's trying to do very well. And there's a certain segment of the gaming community that every so often want that experience.
It's interesting. When you bring up the term self-aware, I just find that fascinating. I don't know if I've ever thought of a board game being self-aware of its popcornness, of its like explosions or its like visceral. The idea that this is a game that is just trying to be visceral, it's just trying to be exciting. But I guess for me, the difficulty is figuring out what signs does a game, maybe Heroes specifically or whatever, that it is being self-aware of its popcorn.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think there are two better examples that I'll bring up, but I'm not sure if you've played them. One is a game called Dragoon.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't played it. It's the one with the sparkly bits.
Yeah, you can get plastic pieces, but why would you? You want the metal bits, right? Dragoon would be one example, and then there's another one called Vengeance, which was kind of like a revenge movie board game, a board game version of a revenge movie. To me, both of those games are extremely self-aware in that, by their very nature, it can even be aesthetics, by their art direction, by even flavor text. Sometimes you can tell that they're trying to create an experience which is, it might be pulpy, it might be silly, it might be a little bit over the top and ridiculous, but it's still. See, because the difficulty is that I think that there's a clear distinction that I'm very much struggling to articulate. I think there's a clear distinction between games that are silly and are perhaps over the top, and games that think they're being silly and over the top and are just crap,
Would a way to define it be something along the lines of it? I may be completely off, but a game that is willing to sacrifice a little bit of the mechanical side in service of a thematic experience or of the experiential side of things? Does that make...
I think potentially. I think like Dragoon is an example of that, where mechanically the game is not probably in the upper echelon. You're rolling 2d6 on a grid, and you're basically populating a map with these little towns that you can turn into cities. But really, it's a lot of die rolling and moving your little dragons around, beating each other up, punching each other in the face, stealing their gold. It's not a huge step up from mass market games that you might find at a Target. Well, Target sponsors. I don't want to denigrate Target because it's sponsors of this fine podcast, but
that's right.
And you almost can't use that argument anymore because more and more you're finding
Yeah.
some pretty legit hobby games in Target. But that game is not a huge step up mechanically from some of those games. But I do think that it creates more of a just a silly, over-the-top experience. And do I want to play these games all the time? Absolutely not. But I think that they have a right to exist in the same sphere and to still be given some recognition for doing what they want to do and reveling in it.
See, I'm chomping at the bit here because I just don't know how to disagree with you more and how to articulate that, because Dragoon is just badly balanced, right? Like, you could take the same components, you could take the same board, and you could make a game that has some tactical strategic depth that would be sort of fun for hardcore gamers, but great for novices and lighthearted players. Like, I can see Dragoon working, but it doesn't right now because it's just roll dice. It's roll dice, go around, and to articulate that the designers of that game know that they're making something that's mechanically, like, not sound, I think is giving it a lot of credit.
Well,
I mean, and it's not Dragoon specific, per se. It's just this concept of, for example, have you played Cthulhu Wars?
Oh, it's my number 40 game of all time, sir.
Great, because Cthulhu Wars, in my mind, is a fantastic example of a game that is this close to being a popcorn game, quote unquote, except underneath it all is the strategic Euro-ness that you can play it much more hardcore and competitive the way that Mark Nealon and I like to play board games, but you can also play it in this ridiculous, over-the-top, oh my god, what did you just do to me? I had no idea that power existed. Wasn't that fun? Wasn't that funny? It was big. It was splashy. But underneath it is this core of, if you want to get into it, you can. And so when you talk about Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, it's just like the barrier of entry. Reading the rule book took someone 45 minutes. Learning the game took everyone at the table 30 minutes. And that barrier to entry is so much different than like watching a popcorn movie. If we want to turn our brains off and, do drugs together, we could certainly we could do that.
In fact, would you like to do that, Mike? That's
no. It would be difficult from so far away.
Okay.
Okay. Well, this is interesting. Let me try to rebut some of this. Number one, I think you slyly, perhaps even playfully, but certainly deliberately misinterpreted my argument. I am not saying that the designers of Dragoon knew that they were making a game that is mechanically substandard. I would venture to argue that they would not say that their game is mechanically substandard. Now, in the critical sphere that we all exist within, I think we can all agree that it is not a mechanically deep game. Okay. And I was just trying to use that as an example. I would argue with you, and I do, and am doing so right now. I think that they are self-aware of the game that they have there. I think that they created exactly the game they wanted to create. It may just not be a game that you particularly appreciate, and that's fine. I don't think it's the best game of all time. I don't think it's in my top 200, but I think that there are certain times where I'm in the mood to do something stupid like that. And I'd rather do that than other games that take themselves much more seriously. Now, I do think that there is a much closer comparison to make with Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea and Cthulhu Wars. I would also agree with you that Cthulhu Wars is probably a pretty damn good definition of what I tend to think of as a popcorn game. It's a much better example than Dragoon would be. I was just trying to think of something else that I thought was particularly self-aware. I think Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, I'm a little bit surprised you found it that difficult to kind of get into. Now, I do think that there's a fair amount of information load on the player boards, and I think that that's something that can be challenging.
Possible to parse?
No, come on.
Honestly, that was one of our biggest frustrations with it, is that every single player has a massive board in front of them of abilities, and in order to do anything well, you have to be, what does Kellen's massive board of abilities do? What does Mark's massive board of abilities do? And that just felt like impossible to keep in your head at any one time.
Oh, and then they kept changing.
Well, do you really, though? Or do you have to know that this faction tends to focus on this thing, this faction tends to focus on that thing, that faction tends to focus on that thing, and we all have progressions that are all quite similar, just like Cthulhu Wars in a lot of ways. There are certain things that they're going to allow you to move more, or they're going to allow you to pop up on the board and spawn in a particular place, or they're going to allow you to affect the gates in some way. And I know I'm jumping back and forth between Cthulhu Wars and Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, but I'm going to do it. I think it's a similar thing where there's And maybe this is a playstyle thing too. I'm not accusing you of this, but if the shoe fits, then please do wear it. I'm not a min-maxer as a general rule. I'm much more concerned about doing my own thing well. And of course, I have to be aware of what the people around me are doing depending on the type of game. But in Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, it's good enough for me personally to know, okay, the orcs are more stabby. They're, better in combat, and the elves are better in magic. And they're, because that's really what it is. Everyone has a slightly better starting point in one of those things that you can do in the game. And all of the progressions are generally similar across all the boards. Now, would it help for someone to know that and kind of lay that out to people at the beginning of the game? Yeah, because the rule book doesn't tell you that. Right. You know what I mean? And if you haven't played all of those factions, maybe it wouldn't be intuitive to say, oh, okay, they're better at this, they're better at this. But if you look at those player boards, there's not a huge difference in the progression across all of those.
It's interesting that you bring this up because when you mentioned that it may be a play group thing, it strikes me as that is exactly what it is. Because for me, broadly speaking, when I think about people I'm playing games with, obviously there are nuances, but I'm thinking of the non-gamer sort of group and then the gamer sort of group, at least in my life.
Sure.
They sort of segregating those. And I don't think I would ever bring up a game like Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea with the non-gamer group because it would seem like too much, way, way, way far afield from what they'd be interested in. And then in terms of my gamer group, I wouldn't have suggested because of the squishiness in being able to succeed and win, the competitiveness, there's too much gray area, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of the people I play games with, that it wouldn't work with them either. But I can, now that you're talking about it, envision a group that is sort of in between, a group that are gamers, that board games are one of their big hobbies, but also appreciate or like or enjoy games where the competitive bent. I think our groups have like a competitive bent that other groups may not have. And
but what is driving when you're in this mood where you don't want to play a competitive, ultra tight Euro design, but you also don't want to play a party game? Like, why aren't you actually watching a popcorn movie? No. I'm completely serious.
The control. It's not as passive.
But it has such a bigger investment of time to get to the point.
Yeah,
you turn on a movie in 6 seconds.
But you want to move the guys around the board. You want to move your army. You don't care that you don't know the odds, but you want to move your monster. That's my guess. I mean, again, it doesn't line up with my way of enjoying games in general, but that would be my guess. It's like a non-passive, let's make these armies clash and see what happens and roll dice and see how things work out, and I'm going to do spells at you, and you're going to do spells at me, and
and I mean, I guess that goes exactly back to what I was saying about Sanctum, which is that I feel like it might actually work better as a movie because you almost have no actual choice in what's happening.
Well, to sort of like allude back to something we were saying earlier about this other group I have where I would be quite happy to play Sanctum with, right? And to what you were saying, Mark, I do think it is a question of play groups because while I've now acknowledged that Sanctum is not for our main game night, it's not for Kellen and Mark, I do have a very specific use case where I think it would go over quite well and would be a game I would enjoy playing because there's enough of a game there for me to sort of enjoy it in the right group. I think that same group is where I've had a lot of fun playing games like Zombicide for me, which is in my very specific popcorn game that I've played a fair bit. I don't love. I would never proclaim that Zombicide is a mechanically sound game.
But we could edit it so that you would say Zombicide is a mechanically sound game.
But where I want to sort of push back a little bit on you, Mike, is I think that Zombicide could be, to carry on what Kellen was trying to say, is that I think Zombicide could be designed to be a game that is both mechanically sound and still an experiential, satisfying game. And kind of the thing that I feel very strongly about some of the dudes on the map games that we like Cthulhu Wars and like Inish, versus Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, is they do feel mechanically sound. They do feel like they have a structure to their design that doesn't feel, haha, I now have this ability, you didn't see that coming because you couldn't read my board on this side of the table. And everyone can have a good time with that. I could play Inish with that group. I could play Inish with our group and have a great time with it. There is something to that design soundness that I think the sort of popcorn games that you're describing, like Zombicide, like Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, lack. And I would struggle to recommend those to most people.
Oh, it's an interesting take. I personally find much less of a chasm between what you need to know about other players in Cthulhu Wars and in Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. I know that we keep coming back to those games, but I think that those games are much closer together than perhaps the three of you do.
But that's the trust, right? The trust in Cthulhu Wars is that, LOL, what the hell just happened? But I know that at the core, there's a strategically sound game. Like, I know that it exists there if I want it. If I want to try hard it, I could. If I want to min-max it, I could. And that's almost a fundamental assumption for a board game that I'm willing to play.
And
like,
how are you convinced that Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea is not? How many times have you played it?
I have not played Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea enough, but the rules overhead and getting through the games that I have played made it so that I wouldn't be returning over other games like Blood Rage, Inish, Cthulhu Wars,
that's completely fair. I think those are two different arguments. I absolutely agree with you that there's a lot of initial rules overhead, and to play the game the way that you're describing it, where you would necessarily be able to make an objective opinion about the core mechanics of the game, you'd have to feel like you were pretty well versed in all of the different things. I get that, and you're right. Most people probably aren't going to take the time to do that if they don't have a good first experience. And you don't have quite as much of that rules overhead at the beginning in Cthulhu Wars.
Well, and it's hard because I like you a lot, but then I look at your top 10 and I think, why do I like you a lot?
We have very different taste in games, and I would venture to say that we are very different gamers. And I'm okay with that. And I would venture to say that you are too, as much as you like to posture or otherwise. But I agree. I think that we have very different taste in games, and I think that maybe what we look for in games are very different. And again, I don't know that that's a problem.
So I was trying to figure out in preparation for the show what popcorn games I liked. And I think for me, when I'm trying to strike that balance between a splashy sort of game, a game that has like experiential, but without the competitive bent or competitive through line, what I go to mostly are dexterity games. For me, that's where I get the popcorn feeling from, because when you succeed or fail in a dexterity game, I threw that too far, or my hand slipped or something like that. You get the uproarious laughter and like the big splashes and the literal physicality of a game. For me, comes from dexterity games. So a game like Meeple Circus is my flavor, and I think my group's flavors of popcorn games, things like that.
So it's beyond a filler game, right? It's beyond a filler game in length?
Sure, yeah. It's not something that we would, let's just throw this in.
Yeah, let's just
games.
play Meeple Circus before we start something else.
It's a full-fledged game. It's a fully fleshed out game. But whatever competition you derive out of dexterity games generally is tamped down a bit, because everybody understands we're just playing a dexterity game. Some people may be better at it, some people may be worse at it, but the competition is lessened.
And it's not a party game.
Right. It's not a party game. There's more to it. It's more involved.
And it's not a beer and pretzels game.
Right. It's interesting because I was trying to figure out the difference between beer and pretzels and popcorn. I think there is a very clear difference. I think with beer and pretzels, you're looking for a game that can be set up quickly. I think that's a big thing to it. Small rules, overhead, small footprint even. I think the
almost can literally be played in a
right.
bar.
In a bar, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, I found that an interesting separation between the two. For me, that's when I'm looking for popcorn games, I'm going to lean dexterity.
I think that there's a specific mechanic that I sort of like a lot for the feeling of popcorn games, and that's sort of like more press your luck style games. So Quacks of Quedlinburg, for example, is a game for me recently that I've been getting a lot of joy out of, where you cannot take the result of that game too seriously, because it's ultimately about reaching to a bag and hoping you're pulling the things you need. But there is a satisfaction in it that I've gotten good fun out of with both gamer groups and, non-gamer groups, basically. I think that also extends to maybe lighter games like Ink and Gold. The other big example I had was something like XCOM, the board game, which is essentially a big series of press your luck events, but it's wrapped in this feeling of, oh my God, impending doom. The app is telling us bad things are happening all the time. But again, the resolutions are ultimately just a press your luck roll dice mechanic. So it's hard to be too invested in the end result, but you're all having fun doing it. To me, that feels like that fits my flavor of the sort of popcorn games I like to play.
I guess I think about this as like my working definition of a popcorn game right now is a game that I still try hard in, but I can't ultimately care whether I emerge victorious or not. And so things that come to mind for me are Magical Athlete, which is just a completely silly game where you're drafting heroes and then roll to move. But there's still this sense that you want to win the race real bad. And that almost stands out in my collection as a little bit of an anomaly, like that I haven't gotten rid of it because it's kind of a joke. It's this close to being a joke. Other games that came to my mind is this new game that I have, Nanty Narking. A redo of Morkaporf, Discworld. And in that game, the framework of you have a hidden objective and you have a hidden objective and like, good luck, try to figure out what everyone else's objective is. And it's similar to Archipelago in that way, a game that I adore, my second favorite board game of all time. And yet, you're mostly drawing cards and it's really quick and fast and what you can do on the board. Like I would never be that bothered if I lost. And yet I'm still really, really desperately trying to exert some control. And so there's this illusion, perhaps, that I have control. And then the only other one, which is also pretty quintessential beer and pretzels, is Wiz War, because there are these big splashy abilities, and it's not really about winning. It's just about using a big splashy ability to make Mark and Nealon miserable. And so I think that's my throughput here, because I don't consider those party games. They're not filler games. They're not very light. Like they have rules to them and they have things that you have to learn, but they also evoke some type of experience. I think the biggest like friction point, Mike, is this like, I'm not sure that I ever want to watch a popcorn movie. And similarly, I don't know that I aspire to that. And philosophically, I guess that's kind of where the objection comes from.
And duly noted. And one thing I want to make absolutely clear is that I don't want to be known as the defender of popcorn gaming. Please, please, please don't hang that label on me because of something I flippantly said in a 2.5-hour podcast with Dan.
And Dango Tank, the icon is going to have popcorn just shooting out of it. It's also going to be a little overweight.
Sure I'm not willing to die on the mountain of Dragoon, trust me. But I know that you like to be a bit combative here, and I was happy to be the meat shield and throw myself behind some questionable games. But I do think that it'll be nice that we can agree on a couple things. I think actually Nanty Narking or the one I'm familiar with, the Discworld, is an absolutely fantastic example of a game that I would be calling a popcorn game. I agree with you. And maybe one of the things that I didn't clasp onto until you mentioned that game is that there is that element of trying to control things that are inherently uncontrollable. And I think you feel it in that game. And I think that kind of lends to the experience I am desperately and hopelessly trying to convey. I think another example that just came to mind would be something like Mission Red Planet, where, it's a game that has a lot of randomness, a lot of take that, but you still somehow have the sense that you can control things, even though there's a part of your brain deep within that's telling you that you have no control. So that's another one. And I think Arcadia Quest would be another good example of a game that kind of has this, you feel like you have some agency over what you're doing, but inherently it's a ridiculous system and there's a lot of randomness and chaos thrown into the mix. So perhaps
you can kill each other.
And you can kill each other, and not only can you, but you are actively incentivized to do so.
I'm going to wrap us up very quickly around the table. Mark, popcorn games, yes or no? You have 30 seconds.
I walked in here as a firm popcorn game no man, and I am still a popcorn game no man, but I think Mike has softened I was a kernel, I was a hard kernel, but there is a little bit of that fluffy popcorn sticking out. I'm never going to volunteer to play that, but I'm actually legitimately appreciative that I sort of understand the psychology behind enjoyment of popcorn games. I think Mike's done a good job of expressing that side of things. So still no for me, but
that is your 30 seconds. Mike, 30 seconds, popcorn games, yes or no?
No. I'm going to rebut Mark. I think I've done a horrible job of explaining it, but that's okay. I would say no most of the time, quite honestly, but every so often that is okay. And I think what's happened is I've been cruelly lured into the lair of making it sound like this is what I choose and even advocate for at game nights. That's usually not the case. But if I'm playing a game, as long as I feel like the game is delivering the experience that it intended to, I'm usually okay with that. And that's really all I'm getting at, is that every so often it doesn't have to be Lacerda. That's all. Can we please not all have a 15-page player aid? That's all I'm saying. every so often, it's okay to play a stupid game. Not 90,
think
not,
Kevin and I-
not 95% of the time. 95% of the time, I want to play a game that I feel like has some real depth of strategy and whatever the case
I feel
may
like
be.
Mike has got a lot longer 30 seconds than my 30 seconds.
Well, he is our guest. I was. Yeah.
Oh, crap.
I can see the floor.
Well, I wanted to cut him off, but then he got to hashtag never Lacerda.
Well,
I
I'll
was
just
super
say,
happy.
like, Kellen and I wouldn't really have
guys-
that much of an argument against playing less Lacerda games.
You guys
frankly.
can walk off in the sunset together.
I think broadly speaking, I'm sort of in the same place you are, Mike. Like, yeah, I think there is a time and a place for them. It certainly wouldn't be my first choice of game to play at an average game night, but with the right audience and with the right game, they have a place in the industry, certainly. Kellen, yes or no?
How much time do I have again?
30 seconds.
And the clock is running.
No.
Okay, I think that's going to do it for the show. Thank you so much for being on the show, Mike. Do you want to tell us a little bit about anything you want to plug?
Oh, plug sounds so filthy. No, I'll just say if you already are a fan of the Dice Tower, which is now where I work, they are doing a Kickstarter campaign, Dice Tower Kickstarter. So if you feel compelled to give them money, that would be wonderful to support it. If you don't feel compelled, that's still fine. You can listen to the Sporadically Bored podcast if you want to, for a change, not listen to board games. You can do that. That's all I got.
Start with the episode that Neelan and I were on.
Specific
Skip the
episode.
Kellen episode.
Excuse me? Episode 35, their number one downloaded episode of all time?
Is that what number it was?
Yeah.
Okay, I never know the episode numbers.
I've listened to it a few times
He's made it to number one
when
downloaded episode.
when I'm in the shower. But seriously, I think it's a good reminder for me to back the Dice Tower Kickstarter. It is a podcast I listen to weekly and has been part of my routine, almost maybe 7 years. I remember in New York City listening to it on the subway when I felt kind of alone in New York City.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's been a constant, since college for me, and that means less than you old people, but still something to think about. It's laudable that it's been going on for so long,
Right.
And definitely something worth supporting.
I think that's going to do it for us. As always, you can reach us on our social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Please join our Discord, boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. It is a glorified chat room where you can come talk to us, hang out, talk to a bunch of gamers. There are meets happening across the country this week. There's one in Los Angeles on 125.
Gotcha. And also you can tag Mike DiLisio and disagree with him on anything you want. We give you permission to tag him as he occasionally turns up and spreads mischief.
I do, and
Yeah.
I'm anticipating a tremendous amount of tagging. Please, I know I did not put myself in a very good position. That's all right.
That's going to do it for the show. Thank you all for listening. Thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Cause there's a ride in everyone you meet, but what's on your mind, kid? What's on your mind, kid? I'm high. I'm ready. I want you to save me from myself, baby. There's a story that's
Cool.
All right.
Okay.
Do we want to do a clap real quick just in
Sure.
case?
Yeah.
Am I count? You guys are letting me count down, right? I'm in charge.
All right.
3, 2, 1.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Normally
great.
we go 1, 2, 3, and you went 3, 2, 1. But I mean that's okay. I mean it's not a huge difference. I don't know. I mean I think one is clearly better than the other, but I'll leave that to you to figure out which is.
We would do it your way, but Neelan's from the southern hemisphere.
Right.
So,
So we do.
in addition to the toilets flushing
Right,
backward,
right,
we
right.
also count backwards.
Definitely.
Counterclockwise numbers. All right. Okay. Here we go. I'm gonna start this here.
Okay. This is by Philippe Naduc, who previously did. What is that game called?
Adrenaline.
Oh my god.
Neelan,
Sorry.
is it stage fright?
Could
Normally,
be. Could be.
in our
I'm staring
threesomes,
straight into my
it's
beautiful
normal.
eyes.
We get him here.
Yeah.
You can't get
it's
things
all falling
going.
apart.
To be
It's
fair,
your hype in your mind.
I am pretty dreamy. I mean, let's just get that out there, right?
We're going to shrink your window a little bit because I think Neelan's
hide it.
blushing.
If I had
Yeah.
$1 for every time I heard that.
Okay. So.
Can I just make a public service announcement?
Sure.
Has everyone here seen the classic Disney film Mulan?
I have not seen that.
Yes.
I haven't.
We all know and love Mulan, and they are re-releasing it next year or maybe this year No, they're re-releasing it this year, but they're taking all the music out of it.
They're making it.
really?
They're making it live action, aren't they?
Yes,
Yeah.
live action,
But they're not doing the songs?
none of the songs.
Really?
And
That's
a girl we're
interesting.
fighting for is worth fighting to put back in the movie. So I have a plan.
Make a man out of you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
the
saying.
Killer song.
So this is the plan, and I need you all in on it. I'm going to go on opening night. I'm going to write down moments when the song should be in the movie.
Okay.
And then we're going to publish it online as like a list of when to start sing-alongs in theaters. And then we're going to get it to go viral socially so that when other people are at the theater the following weekend, that, you know, I'll Make a Man Out of You. And what other classic songs are in this movie? Gosh.
Wasn't-
I can only think of one.
yeah, that was the
No,
one
there's
that I know of.
Christina Aguilera has her like
Yeah, I don't remember.
Genie in a Bottle.
That's it.
No, that was Aladdin, I think. Yeah.
Well, it seems like a fail-proof plan.
it's a,
This is clearly
People would
well
do
thought out. I'm on
Yeah.
board 100%.
That's right. That's right.
people would do this. Mark, you're wrong.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to you proving me wrong.
If there's anything that people enjoy in a movie theater, is someone next to them with a notebook and a pen and a flashlight. So I think this is a really good idea.
I'm not joking. I actually think this could happen.
Talking about you're not joking?
I'm not joking. Well, I mean, no, I'm not joking.
Okay. Well, Godspeed and good luck.
Because they're using the tunes, they're using the melodies as part of the trailers for the new movie.
Right.
To be like, remember that beautiful song
Sure.
you liked? Well, it's not in the movie.
No, I understand that you're upset about it. What I don't understand is that you are serious about saying that this like audience
I
sing
think
along
that I could start a Facebook group
Yeah.
called Sing Let's Get Down to Business at the appropriate time in the film.
So as soon as this recording is over, you have your task set out in front of you.
Did you see the Area 51 Facebook viral thing?
God, what are we talking about?
This is when, did you see this? It's
I
when they
think
were
I-
all going to run at Area
And it
51.
completely failed.
No, they made it. What are you talking about?
Yeah, they stormed Area 51. So definitely.
It's fascinating to me what inspires passion in people. You know, I see hundreds of things on a daily basis like this, and I guess I wish I'm jealous that none of them call me to action like this does to you. Obviously, you're a man of action, and I applaud you
Thank
for
you.
that, sir.
Thank you, Fandango Tank. I appreciate that. Zombicide is a mechanically sound game.